Hello, everyone. It's Jamal Thomas. Welcome to the Progressive Soapbox. I am doing this live again. At the very least, it'll help me get used to being live. I'm still not quite accustomed to it. I try to be pretty concise, and that doesn't always work. Also, when I say new viewers come on, I try to repeat some of the stuff so the people aren't necessarily completely in the dark on what I'm talking about. In this particular case, I am talking about Elizabeth Warren's interview on Cenk Uygur, TYT. That interview was tepid at best. That interview was tepid at best. And there were questions that he asked. There weren't bad questions, but there weren't enough follow up to pin her down. Yeah, there wasn't enough follow up to pin her down. So it's kind of, she just got away. Let's take a look at the interview and we could talk about it through it. I saw it, I went through it once. I think keeping the notes because I wanted to be fresh looking at it. And yes, I went through it once, so it's not fresh, but let's take a look.
Senator Elizabeth Warren joins us today. Very, very happy to have you. She's got a new book out, This Fight is Our Fight, The Battle to Save America's Middle Class. And if you don't know her, you probably haven't been watching The Young Turks or anything political. But she's also the creator, of course, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. Just over the weekend, I read an analysis that said that it returned $11 billion to consumers.
Directly to families that were cheated. This is what I love about this agency. This is government that actually works for people. So we gathered up to build the agency, gathered up all the consumer protection laws that were already out there, put them with one agency. They got the resources, they developed the expertise, and they have a mission. And they get out there to level the playing field. So you get cheated on credit cards or a bank account or a student loan, and the consumer agency comes in and does some enforcement, and they have actually forced these big financial institutions to give back money. And here's the other part they do. If anybody needs this, they run a complaint hotline, and they have now handled over 1 million complaints. So when you get dinged for $5 because it's a charge and they won't reverse the charge, and you think that's wrong on some credit deal, or give back your $15,000 down payment on a house because they said blah, 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 they get to keep it. People file complaints through this consumer agency. You can go to cfpb.gov or consumeragency.gov, and you can look at the complaints. You can file a complaint, and a lot of the complaints, not all of them, but a lot of the complaints get resolved through the agency. People get their money back. It's a way to level the playing field between ordinary folks and these giant banks.
So
she gets credit for this. She gets credit for this. If you remember, part of the reason why Elizabeth Warren was considered so progressive was she was aggressive in going after banks. She was essentially a class warrior in that sense. So she was considered this kind of Sanders-esque person. She gets credit, so her stance is complicated. Like, her position among progressives, at least for me, I may be projecting a little bit, it's complex. It's not necessarily the most straightforward thing. With Sanders, you can say, okay, I like all the stuff that he's saying and everything else. I don't like what he's doing with Democrats, but him as an individual and the things that he espouses, yes, I like. Elizabeth Warren gets a little bit slipperier because she's taken certain positions in the past that weren't done with integrity at all. There's no way. There's no argument that Elizabeth Warren can make that tells me that certain of those positions were taken with a level of integrity. Those were political positions. Now, you can say, yes, she's a politician. That's true. Let me put it this way. 2 + 2 is 4. That's a logic thing. Because 2 + 2 is 4, it's like it's one of those things of, it's a basic logic. 2 + 2 is always 4. If Elizabeth Warren is progressive, and she's saying she's progressive, and she's saying, yes, I'm a class warrior. I'm out here fighting for these things. I've put in the Consumer Financial Bureau. When Republicans blocked me from being on that bureau, I became a senator. What about the other stuff? Now, Uygur is going to get to it, so I'm not going to go into this particular dialogue, but my point is, yes, she gets credit on this, and yes, her perspective, or the perspective it seems among progressives, is complicated. You have some people who chucked her and said, screw her. throw her to the side. You have other people who have a question mark on her. I have a question mark on her. I don't want to chuck her because ultimate class is one of the big issues. And as a politician, do you have to maneuver your way into certain things? Maybe, kind of, even if I don't like it. I got to give her the benefit of the doubt to some degree. But that benefit of the doubt is extremely strained at this point. Yeah, it's extremely strained. So let's keep going with the interview, and this stuff will come up later on.
So I think the Consumer Finance Protection Bureau is amazing. I think that if I saved people $11 billion, I could retire off of that.
Dang.
Okay, so I'd feel great about that. But it does lead to an interesting question about how you walk the line between what you want to push forward and get accomplished like you did with the Bureau, but at the same time resistance from some quarters of the Democratic Party.
Yep.
So President Obama, good example there. He did set it up. On the other hand, it was obvious that you should have led that, and he didn't have you lead it in the beginning. You have tweaked him on occasion. I have done more than tweak him, but I'm not a senator. So what's your sense of how to walk the line when you disagree with Democrats that you think are a little bit more careful, honestly, with their donors?
Yeah. So, it's interesting you'd raise that because I'll tell you a story from the fight over the CFPB. The financial crash has happened, and a lot of people are focused on the big things, what we're going to do, what became Dodd-Frank, right, about the big financial institutions and too big to fail and so on. And I'm looking at it and saying, hey, guys, if we had had a consumer agency in place, this crash never would have happened because you couldn't have built up that kind of risk in the system from lousy, cheating mortgages, which is what those things were. So I'm pushing and I'm pushing and I'm pushing to get the consumer.
You had Glass-Steagall. You had Glass-Steagall. I mean, it wasn't like she's acting like this just magically happened. You had Glass-Steagall in place. One of your other Democrats, Bill Clinton, got rid of it. He got rid of it. Now, understand, a Republican couldn't really do it because a Republican is pushing up against a narrative that says Republicans want to do it. As a Democrat, getting rid of all those financial regulations, it just comes across as, oh, this guy is trying to, play the middle. He's a centrist of sorts. A Democrat is doing it, so it's okay. George Bush wouldn't have been able to get that done. Bill Clinton got it done. The crash that you're talking about, the Financial Protection Bureau that you've created, to some degree was necessitated based upon the actions of the other Democratic president, the one before Obama. Look, this is just context in regards to history of what took place, in regards to why that went on. He started cutting all these financial regulations. Oh, we have a crash. Who knew? It came out of thin air. It just happened. It didn't just happen. It didn't just happen. And your Consumer Financial Protection Bureau is literally a direct result of the actions of the previous president or the failings of the previous president, Bill Clinton, a Democrat. Let's keep going.
Agency. And let's face it, the banks all hate it. They're spending more than $1 million a day to lobby against financial reform in general, but the consumer agency is like literally right at the crossroad, right in the center of what they're saying. No, it will never happen. Republicans, no, we can never have this. And Democrats, there were some yes, some no. And so I had someone ask me, this is long before I was ever in politics, ever thought I would be. Someone asked me, so if you can't get this strong, independent agency that you want, kind of in effect, I think the question was something like, how much of a compromise could you take to get everybody on board? And I said, look, this is a good, strong, independent agency. And my second choice is no agency at all and a lot of blood and teeth left on the floor.
Well, I like that kind of talk.
And because that's how I saw it. You either get something good that's worth fighting for, but the point is you get in there and you fight for it.
So now I like your
which is why I voted for Hillary Clinton, and which is why I supported and stomped for Hillary Clinton. Look, like I said, she gets credit for the financial thing. And the whole blood and teeth on the floor, yes, she gets credit for that. I mean, she seems to be balls out when it goes towards that particular thing, which is why I have a question mark. Because, you know, for me, I've always made the point that the issue is class. Meaning, if she's going to be a class warrior, well, she's going to be a class warrior. Now, the question becomes, politically, what is she willing to compromise on? Even within this idea of class warrior, what is she willing to compromise on? And I'm unclear on what she's willing to compromise on, which is why I am a serious question mark and why I'm strained in regards to with Elizabeth Warren. Let's keep going. That attitude of either I want this or there's going to be a lot of blood and teeth on the floor and I'll take nothing. I'm Elizabeth Warren and I'm voting for Hillary Clinton. That doesn't go. That makes no sense. It's like, so your best choice that you're thinking about is Hillary Clinton. That makes no sense. That makes no sense. I understand what you're saying with the Financial Protection Bureau, but if you're saying that you're this warrior of sorts, where you're willing to just take it all on the line, and you're going to be uncompromising in what you're going after. But I'm willing to compromise and vote for Hillary Clinton and support Hillary Clinton and not support Bernie Sanders. Just saying, it doesn't make sense. Maybe it's one of those things where she looks at it as, those guys are my enemies, so I can go balls out against my enemies. I need these guys because these guys are the people I'm working with, in which case I need to bend myself politically to attune myself to the best politics that I can get. Meaning she's aware of her political environment and she feels that she has to play a particular line for that political environment. That's my thought. At least that's my thinking. Let's keep going.
Emphasis on the word fight. You got the word fight twice in your title this time. Last book was.
Next one we'll have it 3 times.
Last book was A Fighting Chance. By one count, yet over you used the word fight 250 times in the first book. So that's near and dear to my heart. But so that leads to 2 questions: one about Democrats, one about Republicans. So Kurt Schilling, who considered running against you, now apparently looks like is not going to. We'll see. First of all, how much would you love to run against Kurt?
That's up to Kurt Schilling.
Okay, all right. Use the word hate in regards to you, saying this is the senator we hate most. In the words of FDR, do you welcome their hatred?
Look, guys, bring it on. I mean, that's kind of my bottom line here, because what I want to do is I want to say, tell me exactly what it is that drives you so crazy about me. Is it the fact that I really do believe that the federal government should not be making a profit off the backs of students on student loans, and that we ought to get ourselves to a place where kids can go to college without getting crushed by student loan debt? Is that the one that drives you crazy? Is the fact, here's one. Is it the fact that I believe in science? And that climate change is real, and that we have a moral obligation to to leave a world in which you can drink the water and breathe the air, and is that what it is? I mean, because that's really, for me, when I hear that kind of talk from them,
where a moral obligation ends, being able to drink water and breathe air. We as human beings make a decision to bring another human being into this world. That's us. We make that decision. We didn't ask to be here. Somebody else made the decision to bring us here. As a society, do we or do we not have a responsibility to make sure that each and every person in this society is taken care of? Now, I don't necessarily mean taken care of like a mother takes care of it. I'm just saying allow opportunity to express themselves in the way they want to express themselves, meaning what task do you want to do? To not use their own frailties about them in order to get them to do that particular task, if that's what they want to do. Do we want to have a society where person is born and we have all these people who are around us waiting to prey on the individual from the time they're born to the time they die, hitting them on the head, ripping their pockets, doing whatever they can to milk that particular person from the time they are born to the time they die? Is that the reality? Isn't that the world that you want to create? I would argue that there's a moral responsibility that goes beyond just breathing the air and drinking the water. The reason they hate Elizabeth Warren is because she's an unabashed class warrior. It has nothing to do with believing in science, none of that stuff. She's willing to fight in a way that adversely affects their profits. And she's not timid about saying, I am fighting you in a way that will adversely affect your profits. I am not going to let you prey on the American public in the way that you're preying on the American public. Yes, I'm going to go after you in regards to these banking regulations. Yes, I want to break up the big banks. Yes, they know that if she had her way, it would be monstrous for them. It would be beneficial to the American public, but it would be monstrous for them. That's why they hate her so much. She doesn't toe this line as the other Democrats. She's not quiet about the issues that go on with Wall Street and financial institutions. She's earnest about it, which means they greatly dislike her. The other Democrats, interesting enough, don't seem to toe the same line that she does, which is interesting. I mean, ultimately, what Elizabeth Warren is saying in regards to financial stuff is correct. Those banks are predatory. Those banks do fuck over people left and right. So her antagonism towards them is justified. They don't like her because they are aware that she knows what they do, and she is very vocal about going after them. That's why they don't like her. It has nothing to do with science or anything else. You're hurting my profits. You're hurting my profits. I'm trying to get money off these people, and you are hurting my profits. I am paying these politicians to go out there and do a particular task, and you are adversely affecting the task that I'm getting them to do. That task being to rape the American public. If you're stopping me from doing that, yes, I'm against you because you're stopping me from doing that. Like, I don't think it's any more complicated than that. Cash runs through Washington. It runs through it, beginning to end. It runs through it. It's the river that Washington is based off. For you to even get elected, you need to be able to raise a certain amount of money to get elected. The person with the most money tends to win, meaning the person who could drown the other person out in ads and all this other stuff tends to win. If you knew that the person with the most money tends to win, what are you going to do? Are you going to cater to your constituents? Or are you going to cater to the people who are going to give you the money itself that's necessary to win? You tell me. What's the point in running a race that you're going to lose? Now, let's give them the benefit of the doubt. Let's say when they're running those campaigns, they look at it and say, all right, yes, I need to take this money. Yes, I need to bend a particular way, but I'm still going to try to do good things for the people who are in my constituency. I'm still going to try to do good things in that office. But yes, there's certain things I need to compromise and bend on because yes, I need this money to get elected. If that's the case, like what does that say for the candidate themselves? Yes, they're taking a bribe. Yes, they're doing things because they're paid to do them. But in their heads, they've created this narrative of, okay, I'm still going to do one or two positive things while I'm in that office, even though I'm paid to do something else. And when legislation comes up that's advantages the people who are paying me, well, yes, I'm going to do what I need to do for the legislation people that are paying me. But in the meantime, I'm going to try to do other good things. What does that mean for that particular politician? What is the perspective of that particular politician at that point? That particular politician becomes somewhat of a complicated factor. He's fucking over the public in one way, but at the same token, he's trying to do something positive in another. And in his head, he's rationalizing that, all right, I got to do this because I can't get elected otherwise. I can't do good stuff in that office unless I get into that office, meaning I need to take this money. Is that a practical? Is that even? Yeah. Is that a practical way of looking at it from the politician standpoint? And I'm saying this is not being craven. This is working on the side of the angels. This is giving the best case scenario. You need 90% of the people with the most money get elected. You know that. You're aware of that. What are you going to do to get elected? You need to get the money to get elected. I mean, it's that simple. It's that straightforward. You can either get that money from your constituents, meaning going from person to person to person to person to person, or you can get those big checks from those super PACs who, run behind in your best interests. And even though there's not supposed to be any collusion between those two things, you certainly know you have a super PAC, and you certainly know who gave millions of dollars to that super PAC. That's collusion, believe it or not. The fact that the politician knows who gave money to that super PAC means that politician is going to bend towards that particular way. The politician full well knows that he's not going to get that money for that super PAC if he does something that adversely affects that super PAC or the donor to that super PAC in the next go round. Do you want to stay in that office? Do you want to get elected again in whatever term you're going to get elected again? Then you better not bite the hand that feeds you. Meaning the people who are giving millions of dollars to your super PAC, the people who are giving you those checks, the people who bundle those checks and gave you those checks for a particular industry. more likely than not, you're not going to bite those hands. You're not going to bite the hand that feed you. Let's keep going. I'm going on slightly of a tangent.
I want to say, so tell me exactly what it is, and let's have it out over those issues. That's what I really
So
want.
that leads to the second question, which is, do you think that they're honest actors? Because my thesis is that they're largely errand boys for their donors. So sometimes I have to confess that I get frustrated with conversation in Washington that treats them as honest actors. I don't, Kurt Schilling's a genuine madman, but he's not in politics yet, right? I think he's legitimately crazy. But there are others, I believe, just Mitch McConnell doesn't have an opinion. He has
donors.
Yeah,
agreed.
Right? And he does what the donors
I
tell
totally
him.
agree with Cenk Uygur.
The reason they were against the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau is obvious. They're
12 billion reasons, right? 11 billion reasons and counting, right?
Yes, their largest donors are the financial industry, and the financial industry wants to be able to keep those $11 billion that, by the way, they are not entitled to, that they took wrongly from consumers, and that's why it was returned, when they had to return it. They admit that they took it wrongly. So that's easy enough, I think, with Republicans, except I'll ask one more question about that, and then we'll turn to the Democrats. Ben Carson. So, okay. So you knew this is coming.
No, it's a fair question.
Okay. So now, but my take on it is maybe a little different than others. So you voted to advance him so that he can get a vote in the Senate, and then you voted against him in the confirmation. But when I saw why you did it and your explanation of it, look, I actually don't care that much about that vote, to be honest, because when a president wins, like President Trump wins, well, he's going to pick loathsome people as his cabinet, and that's a fact of life. And yeah, you fight him, and then likely they get confirmed, and they all did. So, but I think that the part that honestly bothered me a little bit was when, and it goes to the heart of this conversation, is that when you said you met with him and he kind of convinced you that he would be an honest actor. Whereas I don't think that Republicans think that way. I mean, what do? He comes in and they slash HUD dramatically.
Oh, I know.
Right? So there is no, do you think that Ben Carson, when he's talking to you in your Senate office, is having a real conversation with you and that he can deliver on promises not to cut things? Because I think that's just not realistic.
So let me tell you what the conversation was about.
Okay.
The conversation was about lead. And it was about the fact in Massachusetts, we have the oldest public housing stock in the nation. And a lot of there's still a lot of lead paint in them. And the federal government has been promising for years that they would do lead abatement, that they'd get it out, right? And they haven't. And that means year after year after year, when mamas raise those windows and lower those windows, it creates lead dust that the babies breathe in, and it causes brain damage. And Ben Carson and I had a conversation about the effects of lead on brains and about how it is that the federal government is providing housing still in 2017, is still providing housing in America where there's a lead problem. And Carson, whose whole background is as a neurologist, right, a neurosurgeon. Carson went into a whole long, passionate explanation of the importance of lead abatement and the impact of lead on developing brains, and how he would make this a first priority for him. And he said he would fight for the resources to do it. He would fight to have resources in public housing and so on. And I thought, maybe he will. Maybe he will. Not for sure he will, but maybe he will. I'm on the front lines in the fight against Betsy DeVos, whom I had just met with in that same period of time. On the front lines in the fight against the Secretary of Labor, on the front lines in these other fights. But I thought maybe Carson would do this. And then what happened is we advanced him out of committee floor. And in that 5 weeks between that time and the time he goes to the floor, Trump puts his immigration ban in place, trying to ban immigrants from Muslim countries, which is then, of course, declared unconstitutional. We're at the airport fighting on this. Trump makes it clear just where he's heading And Ben Carson makes it clear he's not a guy who's going to stand up to him. And to me, I thought, enough of this. And
just real quick on this. She says she's on the front lines. She's fighting. She's fighting hard. She's bare knuckles, teeth on the floor, blood on the floor. When Trump puts in his Muslim ban, fair enough. Was she fighting brass knuckles, teeth on the floor, when Obama was killing those same Muslims in those countries that Trump was trying to ban Muslims from coming from? Because tell me, I don't think this is an unfair question. You had a Democratic president. You're a Democrat. You're Elizabeth Warren. You worked with him closely to create the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. Gold star. That's actually a good thing. That particular president was using flying killer robots to murder people. The majority of the people that he was murdering were civilians. Now, he was lying about that. They were civilians. He didn't have any constitutional justification. He himself asserted, in the same way that Trump is now asserting, because Obama asserted it, that he can go into any country that he wants. He doesn't need congressional justification. He doesn't even need to tell the Congress for the most part. He just does it. 8 Muslim countries, one after the next, after the next, after the next. Now, even if you make an argument that he had the capacity to go into Iraq, what does that have to do with Syria? What does that have to do with Libya? Like, I guess I'm making this point. How is Obama going into all these countries? How is Trump going into all these countries? What is he using to do this? We, as the public, as the American public, come to some consensus of saying we're willing to subordinate ourselves to the laws of this particular country and function in this game space, this contrived game space. We call it a government, a republic, whatever you want to call it. And existing in this particular game space and existing in this particular environment, we give up rights, we give up certain liberties, and we put those things in a document saying that we have a contract with the government itself because we're giving that government immense power and money that's supposed to function at the best of the American public. Now, if the president of the United States is not using that document, the document that we signed, we essentially gave, because understand, the power of the government comes from the consent of the governed. How do you give consent when you don't know that the president is murdering people abroad? Not just that, if the president doesn't have any constitutional justification to go into another country, if he doesn't have any international justification to go into another country, what justification is he using to do it? That's not a fair question. Meaning, if Elizabeth Warren is upset and hurt and bothered by Donald Trump keeping Muslims out of the country, and yes, I am too. I don't like him doing it. I think it's fucked up. I would argue it's unconstitutional. I think it should have been struck down. You can't say I'm keeping Muslims out the country and then come up with some kind of legalese to come up with a reason to keep Muslims out the country. But you still have to kind of come to this question of, wait a minute, Obama was murdering these people. He murdered thousands and thousands of people. What was Elizabeth Warren, bare knuckles, teeth on the ground, front lines, for this regard? Because I consider this to be a bigger deal. You tell me, which is more important, keeping Muslims out the country or murdering those same Muslims? You tell me, which one would you prefer? Would you prefer to keep locked out the country, or would you prefer to be murdered by a flying killer robot? I get where she's coming from, but come on. These conversations somewhat annoy me because it feels like you had a Democratic president that was doing some ghastly stuff in that office. And whatever justification he came up to do those ghastly things, ultimately he was making things worse. You kill my mom, you kill my brother, you kill my sister, you kill my brother. I'm innocent. I haven't done anything to anybody. What do you think my response is going to be? Do you think my response is going to be mulligan, or do you think my response is going to be to join the fastest thing moving, to try to hit you back? And at the point where I'm hitting you back, I'm not hitting you back as a terrorist. I'm hitting you back in repercussions and somewhat of a freedom fighter. So understand what I'm saying. The people that you're murdering, you're killing abroad, you're creating your monsters. You're creating your monsters. They believe that creating monsters is some way fighting monsters. No, you're creating those monsters. Obama, in that Jeremy Scahill film, they kept saying, why is the kill list getting longer? kill list is getting longer because we're murdering civilians and you're bringing people to the cause of fighting you. You're killing people. What do you think you're going to do? What do you think those people are going to do? You're murdering innocent people. Where was she on the front lines? What was she on the front lines? Brass knuckles, teeth on the floor. Would you rather have teeth on the floor and leave it everything on the mat to prevent somebody from getting murdered or from some kind of finance thing? This is what I'm getting at when I'm saying she has a sketchy record. You would think that murder would bother her more, and yes, I'm using the term murder because that's what it is. If you're taking a particular action that you know is going to kill civilians, you know it. You did it before, you're doing it again. Even if you tell the military, hey, try to calm down on a civilian thing. Well, you've already put in a provision that says if they're 16 or older, they're fair game. They're fair game. Now you're going into one country after the next, after the next, after the next. No constitutional justification. Donald Trump comes in office. What do you think he's going to do? What do you think he's going to do? And are you going to have any grounds to say, wait a minute, Donald Trump is going into all these countries murdering these people when you did the exact same thing? I would wager, or I would say, your teeth on the ground is better spent trying to keep people from being murdered. Or at the very least, I would say try to do both. Your Consumer Financial Bureau was up. What about stopping people from being murdered? I understand stopping them from coming into the country. I get that. I agree with you. Fair enough. That's a fucked up law. I mean, that's a fucked up executive order. And yes, it should have been struck down. I'm just kind of make this case where I'm trying to nail in of saying, yes, that's nice. You guys protested when Donald Trump was keeping people out the country. Where was these protests? Where were these people freaking out and losing their shit when Obama was murdering those same people by the thousands? That's not a fair question. When the president is a certain authority that nobody gave him to murder civilians, including American citizens, why is that not a big fucking deal? I don't understand why this is not a big deal. Murdering people. At which point the murder becomes this thing of, oh, well, the president has authority to just murder people abroad. Wait a minute. Did you just say the president was murdering people abroad? Yeah. What are you getting for lunch? No, wait a minute. It's not what I'm getting for lunch. You just said the president was murdering people. Yeah, no. What's for dinner? No, dude, you said the president was murdering people. Like, this just seems to be a big fucking deal that nobody talks about. Even in this conversation, it did come up. It seems like that would have been the most natural thing in the world. Well, hey, I understand that Donald Trump was keeping those people out of the country. Were you trying to prevent Obama from murdering those same people abroad? Did you have conversations with Obama about murdering people abroad? Did you understand that the president was using flying killer robots to murder people abroad? These seems like natural questions. Let's keep going.
Voted no by the time we got to the floor.
Okay, so has he done anything on lead?
No.
So then what is the assumption you have going forward about, honestly, not just Republicans, but Democrats who are beholden to donor money?
You know, look, it's that right now in Washington, money is everything. This is what I talk about in the book. This fight is our fight, as you know. I talk about the big arc of when America once worked for working people and how unions strengthened, how we built a middle class, how we created opportunity for kids like me, for kids that grew up in families that had nothing. Starting in 1980, going forward to 2017, and how it has been in America that has been filtered. Every decision in Washington gets filtered through how it affects the rich and the powerful. And that's because of the donor class. But I just want to add so much more. And that's what I talk about in the book. It's not just about donors. It's about the lobbyists, the armies of lobbyists that are there. It's about the bought and paid for experts. It's about the so-called think tanks that just churn out something that's churn out ideas that come exactly from the donor base. It's how money, I describe it at one point, how money slithers through Washington like a snake. And it is there at every point, and it's affecting every decision we make. And if we don't fight back, it truly will destroy our democracy.
Well, it's already destroyed our democracy. We're in a kleptocracy at this point. And it's not a democracy, it's a republic. But I get a point. That's me picking. We're already in a kleptocracy. Obama gave 95% of the wealth to the top 1%. That number blows my mind every time I read it. It's one of those things of how do you do that? Like, how do you? It looks like even if you tried, you couldn't do that. Even if you tried, you couldn't do it. We're already at the point of kleptocracy, and it's not even a hidden kleptocracy. Donald Trump openly is putting people in positions that he knows is going to rape the public in those positions. Betsy DeVos has no business being in that role. Ben Carson has no business being in that role. The asshole he put in for the EPA has no business, what's his name, Pruitt, in that role. The guy for the Secretary of State has no business being in that role. The oil man. None of these people have a business being in that role. Those people are going to rape this country blind. It's a kleptocracy. Now, just because it's a kleptocracy doesn't necessarily mean you can't necessarily get your republic back. It's just a full well understanding of where we are. She's right. That's my model. Money runs through the process. Any and everything that goes on in Washington runs through this process of cash. That's my model. When I'm basing a model or base behavior of action, or I say, what is the person going to do? It's often based on what are his incentives, meaning what's pushing him to do a particular thing. This is a capitalistic society. I know people like to separate government from economics. That is space and time. It's inseparable. You have a capitalistic society, meaning money is everything in that particular society. It is the highest virtue. Now, if money is the highest virtue in that society, you have a political apparatus that requires money to get a politician elected. Hillary Clinton had $1.3 billion. Imagine so much money. There's so much money. That money could have been burned on the White House lawn. She lost that money, furthered away. Now, that money wasn't real in the first place, but that money did have the capacity to feed, clothe, food, shelter, and the capacity to do a lot of things. Instead, it was burned on the White House lawn for Hillary Clinton trying to get elected. It runs through Washington. There's no way around it. Because of your economic system is intruding into your political apparatus. It creates a problem. How do you get somebody elected in that particular political apparatus when that political apparatus is purely dependent upon cash to get elected? That's a problem. It's not necessarily an easy problem. It can be solved, but it's not necessarily an easy problem. Elizabeth Warren is right on this. Of course she's right. She works in that process. She full well understands what's going on in that particular process. Let's keep going.
So that's of course absolutely right. In 1980 is when the turn happens, partly because of Supreme Court decisions, Buckley v. Vallejo and Bellotti in '78, where they said corporations have the speech rights to be able to, in essence, legally bribe politicians. So now it's easy for me to point that out, and it's easy for me to criticize Republicans and Democrats on that issue.
Just to be clear, that case doesn't say that. That's a misnomer. Everyone thinks that case says that. It was written up to say it, meaning the person who wrote the summary of it wrote corporations are people too. It's not in the case, it's in the summary. The problem is the summary, not the case itself. The case never actually said corporations are people. If you wanted to look for it, you would never find it in the case itself. Look in the case record. Now, what you will find it is in a summary. I could be wrong on this. I'm going to find the source for this. But yeah, that was never written. Every other Supreme Court case that came after it looked at the summary, and they used the summary as being a basis of everything else. So 1 year, after the next, after the next, after the next. They didn't bother going into the details of the case. They literally just used the summary to make their thing. I'm going to find the details of that. But that is, if I'm not mistaken, that is true. They never say corporations are people too. The summary just says it. Let's keep on.
And you mentioned think tanks. Center for American Progress, you've spoken there, is a Democratic think tank. Third Way has attacked you as a so-called centrist think tank, but I think they're wolf in sheep's clothing that pretend to be on the left, but in fact work completely for corporations. Third Way is a little easier for you. Center for American Progress is a little harder for you since you've spoken there, and I'm sure you have friends there. And it's easy for me, not as easy for you. You're a Democratic senator. Joe Manchin, I think, is another guy who works almost completely for his donors. Easy for me to say, not so easy for you to say. So how do you balance collegiate?
Well, it's easy for you to say because you have somewhat of an incentive. Like, Cenk Uygur is going to be against Joe Manchin regardless, even if he didn't have Justice, Democrats, and everything else. He was going to be against. From a political standpoint, Joe Manchin is, for the most part, a Republican. But you can understand that there's somewhat of a conflict of interest in having a political organization. Now, he's having a conversation about a candidate, Joe Manchin. All right, as a politician or as a political organization or as a news organization. My expectation is I am coming to him because I want accurate, factual data about his candidate, Joe Manchin, and the person who's running against Joe Manchin. The problem is that the person who's running against Joe Manchin is a Justice Democrat, meaning he's in a media organization telling me about Joe Manchin. Does he have a vested interest in not giving Joe Manchin a fair shake? Yes, he does. Does he have a vested interest in giving his candidate a little bit more of a fair shake? Yes, he does. Them two are affiliated with one another. That's a problem. You have a media organization that's covering a candidate who they themselves are sponsoring. I'm just saying, that's problematic. Excuse me. That's conflict of interest. That's not so much in this case because he's going to be against Joe Manchin regardless. But in other cases where somebody is running against a Justice Democrat that's not necessarily a conservative Democrat, what if the guy is somewhat progressive? Can we expect them to give a fair take on the other candidate in every situation when their candidate is running against it? Meaning when a Justice Democrat is running against somebody else, can we expect the organization who's sponsoring that candidate to give an honest appraisal of the opposition and of their own candidate? I leave that question for you. I've given my answer to that already.
Collegiality and working together with Democratic colleagues, and some of the realities about their donor base, or if you're going to be charitable, your differences of opinion.
So look, for me, this is not about collegiality. I just want to be blunt. I'm not running for Miss Popularity. That ship sailed a long time ago. But for me, what this is really about is fighting for the same set of issues I came to the United States Senate to fight for. I came to politics very late in life. I thought I'd spend my whole life as a teacher and a researcher. And what I kept watching is what was happening to America's middle class, what was happening to working families, what was happening to the poor, what was happening to opportunity in America. I'll work with anyone who will help us expand opportunity again. And I want to make a spirited defense that there are folks like Joe Manchin. He works hard on issues that affect working people in West Virginia. He rounded up the whole Democratic caucus, and I give him complete credit for this, to get the U.S. government to move in and make good on the miners' health insurance. These were people who are going to be kicked off their health insurance, people whose lives have been wrecked from years of working in the mines. And when we can get together on student loans, when we can get together on Social Security, expanding Social Security instead of contracting it, when we can get together on the issues that affect the economic well-being of hardworking people in this country, then by golly, I'm going to do it.
So, you could point to a couple of votes that Manchin has done right, of course, right? And I could point to probably more than a couple that he's done wrong, in my opinion. But is there any Democratic senator that you wouldn't support in a primary because they are not progressive enough or they're too beholden to their donors?
Right now, I got to say, I've worked with all of my colleagues, and shoot, Are there places where I don't agree with them? You bet. Are there places I have fought with them? Yes, there have. And places I will continue to fight with them. Places where they've stood up for hardworking families. We couldn't get one Republican to stand with us. Not one. Not.
Yeah, but those things are like far and few between. I mean, you're talking about specific issues where you can get a Democrat to say, okay, yeah, I'll stand up for this issue. We're talking about overarching issues. Senator Warren, how many of the Democrats are going to be in line for single-payer health care? How many? And which ones aren't? Are you going to fight with those people, and are you going to out those people when they're not going to be for single-payer health care? How many of those Democrats will be for tuition-free school, meaning you're not burdening a child with debt, $50,000 in debt for trying to get an education? An education, by the way, that helps the society to which that kid is in. Those are the questions, not this conceptual thing. Be specific. I care about the specifics. How many Democrats are on board for single-payer health care? Do you have enough if you win, meaning Congress, if you win a majority, to get it passed? And beyond, not even if you have a majority to get it passed, how many are for it? You're giving me these conceptual big answers that aren't specific. Joe Manchin worked with us on this particular issue. That's great. That's great. It's some issue that relates to West Virginia. That's fine. I'm talking about the rest of the country. How many Democrats are going to be for single-payer health care? That's a specific question. Which ones aren't? Name 2 that aren't. Name 3 that aren't. That's specific. Elizabeth Warren is answering this question in a way that's so flowery and over the top that her answer doesn't mean anything. I have no clue what that answer means. Will there be Democrats that function together on particular issues? Yes. Are you going to get Republicans to vote for it? No. No. Her immediately pivoting to Republicans is somewhat disingenuous. We're not talking about Republicans. We're talking about Democrats right now. Let's stick to the topic. Hopefully, Cenk Uygur here is going to put her back on topic. Let's see what happens.
One, we talk about expanding Social Security, and we get all of the Democrats standing with us. How many Republicans did we get for that one? None. We can't even get a vote. Student loans. We can't even get a vote on the bill we've got right now to try to import drugs from Canada, which would help bring down healthcare costs. There are things we want to do.
Whoa, 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 whoa. Cory Booker gutted that. At least Cory Booker was one of the Democrats that gutted that bill. They tried to do that once before. Sanders put out a bill to essentially import drugs from Canada. Cory Booker and a few other Democrats said, yeah, no, we're uncomfortable with that. You had Republicans signing on to that. If I'm not mistaken, John McCain and Ted Cruz, in addition to a few other Republicans, signed on to that bill saying, okay, we'll do it. Cory Booker, not so much. Not so much. He came back with his tail between his legs after progressives mauled him, saying, okay, Bernie, let's do it. Let's do it. Let's import drugs from Canada. So I don't know what she's talking about. I mean, it's possible that you tried to do it again and it didn't work. Or died in committee or something like that. Second point, you wouldn't have needed to import drugs from Canada if Obama had made a deal with the drug companies. You wouldn't have needed to do that. Meaning, you want Medicare to have the ability to negotiate with drug companies because Medicare would so big, it can drive down the price of drugs. Obama didn't like that. Obama didn't like that. You wouldn't still have people going broke and bankrupt under Obamacare if you actually did healthcare for the sake of healthcare. Meaning, if you did single payer when you had the chance, if you did public option when you had the chance, none of this stuff would be an issue. You wouldn't have to worry about Trump gutting healthcare and everything else because you wouldn't have had healthcare as this quagmire of sorts where people are like, oh man, I don't particularly like it, but no, I don't want to particularly get rid of it. Medicare, Social Security have full-throated support by the majority of the population. I wonder why. I wonder why. The difference is those things work. They work. They do their job magnificently well. Now, if you had a device already, Medicare, your job would have been to expand Medicare to everybody and get rid of those predatory insurance companies out of the mix. They have no business being there. Medicare essentially is their job. Medicare can do their job. You don't need them. Medicare has like 2% overhead. Those companies have like 30% because they're trying to extract profit out of people's illness. You go to the hospital with a major illness, you have cancer. Your drug company, your insurance company, yes, they got cancer. We're going to sell you these drugs. No, these drugs are not going to cure you, but we're going to sell you these drugs because they're going to keep you alive so we can sell you more drugs. And yes, your insurance company, for the most part. And look, I know the insurance company has a payout at that point. I'm just making this point that their goal in this is profit, not your healthcare. Your healthcare is a pain in the ass to them. Their goal is to accrue as much profit as possible, meaning, yes, they're going to have a 30% overhead because they're trying to extract profit out of that particular system. I'm saying that, do you really want a system where you having cancer is somewhat of a pain in the ass to those companies? Yes, it's great for a drug company, but it's somewhat of a pain in the ass to the insurance company because they have to pay for you now, meaning money has to come out of their pocket to cover you. Do you want their profit leveraged against your healthcare? Is that what you really want? Like every decision that comes up with regards to some procedure or something that you need, your doctor says you need, is leveraged against the insurance company making a choice on whether or not you're going to get it? Or do you want your doctor saying, we need this particular procedure, and you get that particular procedure? The point of healthcare is healthcare. The point of healthcare is healthcare. It's not profit. The idea that Obama protected those predatory vampire insurance companies is gross and disgusting. And the reason that we're having this conversation right now, the reason why she's talking about this right now, is because of the failure of the prior president. Otherwise, you would need to have this conversation about what are we going to do about healthcare? What are we going to do about Obamacare? It wouldn't be an issue. It wouldn't be an issue. Let's keep going. As regards to spending Social Security and whatnot, Hillary Clinton was talking about privatizing Social Security. Or at the very least, Bill Clinton was trying to privatize Social Security. Hillary Clinton had people on her team that wanted to privatize Social Security. If you're talking about all these guys expanding, that's nice. That's nice. But they're talking about this when they're out of power. Hey, I have this bill that I need to pay, but I just lost my job. No, I don't have my job, but I really want to pay this bill. So yes, I get it. You want to expand healthcare when you don't have the potential to expand healthcare because you don't have the votes. Yes, I get it. You want to talk about Social Security. You want to talk about education when you don't have the votes. You had absolute power to do these things. You did not do those things. House, Senate, Supreme Court, filibuster proof majority. You didn't do those things. You didn't do those things. My point is, you're bitching now about Republicans not bringing that stuff up for a vote. Why should they bring it up for a vote? Why? Why should they? I mean, their job is not to help you out. I know that sounds bad, but they're paid not to do that. Meaning, if you're going to do something, you need seats. You need people in those seats in order to assert your legislative will. You made the decision, or not you per se, but your team, to put up Hillary Clinton. She lost to reality show hosts. And losing to reality show hosts, she drove so many people away from the polls that your chance of taking the Senate went away, vanished, went up in smoke. Now, you're going to say that Russia was responsible for losing the House, the Senate, the presidency, the Supreme Court, and what, 66 out of 99 state legislatures? It was all Russia. It was all Russia. It had nothing to do with us. That's great. Look, that's fine. But understand the context. All of this stuff is coming up now when they're in opposition. When they're in power, they weren't talking about this. They weren't talking about this. Again, I'm calling to pay this bill. I just lost my job. How are you going to pay the bill if you just lost your job? I don't know, man, but I really, really want to pay this bill. If you guys were serious about this, you guys would have put this through when you had the opportunity, when you were in power. That's not what took place. Don't tell me about it now, and don't bitch about Republicans not doing it. It wasn't their responsibility to do it. They're paid not to do it. They don't care about this stuff. They're not empathetic about with regards to helping the American public. That's your job. That's your job. When you were in that office, you guys had the potential to do it. You didn't do it. Don't crab on Republicans now. That's not their job to help you in this sense. I want to hear you crying about it. Well, Republicans aren't helping us. Nah, nah. We need Republicans' help because we're so weak we can't get anything done.
Democratic caucus, there are some things for which all of the Democrats have stood strong, and we can't get a single Republican to come across with us. Mostly, I'm saving my fire for those guys.
Okay, I hear you. So now, part of the reason that the Republicans let's say, dislike you, is your wife.
Come on, I'm an easygoing person. What's to dislike, right?
Well, when you cost their donors money, that's
well, there you
dislike.
go.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, is it?
Wait, why didn't you bring up the Cory Booker thing? I mean, the Cory Booker thing directly impeaches what she just said right there. Elizabeth Warren, I understand what you're saying, but didn't Cory Booker and a few other Democrats gut the bill that Sanders was trying to put out to get drugs imported from Canada? Yes or no? I mean, I understand you're saying Republicans won't bring it up for a vote, but didn't Republicans agree to that particular bill? You had John McCain, or at the very least, I think you had Ted Cruz. Yes or no? That looks like it impeaches that particular testimony. And again, the question of, you're saying this now, but you guys didn't do it when you were in office. Why didn't you do it when you were in office? What was the hedge? What stopped you? You had power. Even when you had the Senate and the presidency, none of this stuff really came up. Why are you talking about it now that you're out of power? Are you talking about it now that you're out of power to create contrasts? But the moment that you get in office, that contrast will go away and you go back to your standard. That just seems like the natural questions to ask. I mean, letting her off with a hook on this is amazing. He should have pinned her ass to the wall in that particular question. She should not be allowed to get away with that. And she should not be allowed to pivot to talk about Republicans when he's trying to have a conversation about Democrats. That's a fail. That's an absolute fail.
That you're widely considered to be the second most progressive senator in the country. One, do you agree to that?
I don't know your metrics, but I'm somewhere in there. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
And two, are you proud of that?
Yeah. Why wouldn't I be?
Okay. All right. Great. Well, so you asked some
No, I just want
Democratic
to know if
nominees, and they're not.
just want to know if I have to settle for second.
Okay. So now, of course, the person most widely considered to be the most progressive senator is Bernie Sanders.
Yeah.
So a natural question is, why not back him during the 2016 primaries?
Here we go. Here we go.
Aligned in policy.
So look,
what are we looking
at? I think that our primary, I thought was a good thing, and I thought it was good that Bernie was out there, that Hillary was out there. They were giving two different visions. They were out there through all the states. I thought it put both energy on our side. I'll tell you something else I thought it did. It made me proud to be a Democrat. While there were.
That's not an answer. That's not an answer. Nobody asked whether you were proud to be a Democrat. He asked you, why didn't you support Sanders? You call yourself the most progressive or second most progressive. You even go so far as to say, hey, do I have to settle for second? No, you don't have to settle for second. No, you don't. You don't. There's nothing stopping you from being more. Why did you support the guy who was supposed to be ideologically similar to you? A, you touch your face. You hadn't touched your face the entire meeting. That's a tell. That's something you're uncomfortable in this particular process. I could be reading more into it, but in body language, touching your face is usually somewhat of a tell. B, you immediately pivoted to something that had nothing to do with the question that he asked you. Why didn't you support Sanders? Now, it behooves Cenk Uygur to come back directly to that question and say, well, wait a minute, that's not really answering my question, Ms. Warren or Senator Warren. I need to understand, and the people who are watching me need to understand, why didn't you support Bernie Sanders? He seems to be ideologically similar to you. If not ideologically, he seems to be ideologically similar to you. If you're saying you're widely seen as the second most progressive senator, and he's the first most progressive senator, and he's running in a campaign, wouldn't a natural response be to support the guy who's essentially ideologically bent in the same way that you yourself is ideologically bent? That question is natural as can be. Let's keep going. But look, like I said before, I didn't necessarily like the way he did this interview. I thought this interview was a fail. He was very delicate with these questions. And I have to be honest, she has things to account for that aren't being accounted for. I understand that he wants his audience to believe a particular thing about Elizabeth Warren. I don't dislike the woman. But let's be honest, whether you're talking about Standing Rock, whether you're talking about not supporting Sanders, it doesn't matter whether or not Massachusetts would have given it NAG and anything. That's not the point. That's not the point. You believe that this country should be fundamentally different. And believing this country should be fundamentally different, you're ideologically bend, and I'm holding her accountable purely because of her ideological bend, is more closely related to Sanders, meaning your idea of the country is most expressed through Sanders. But you didn't support him. He had the chance to take Massachusetts, and it's very possible that her giving his support would have put him over the top. She didn't support him. She didn't support him. It's an interesting question to ask. Why? Now, her response to this is nonsensical and completely avoids the question. It completely avoids the question. Let's keep going. Maybe she'll get around to an answer. So far, I haven't heard one.
Republicans were doing their clown car thing, you know, with who was going to be voted off the island, and then of course ended up with a reality star as their standard bearer.
The reality star beat your candidate.
I was proud of what Democrats were out there talking about. I thought it was the right thing to do. And in the end, when it was time, I went out there and fought once it was resolved to try to get Hillary elected, and I would have done the same for Bernie.
That's not an answer. It's not an answer. I'm sorry. That's not an answer. That's not an answer at all. He asks you why. You said, well, at the end of everything, Republicans had this clown car and they picked a reality show host. That reality show host beat your candidate. That reality show host, that orange reality show host, the guy who came out talking about Mexicans being rapists at his first conference, talking about to own up for the presidency. That guy beat your candidate. So you calling him a reality show host doesn't really mean anything. He was a reality show host that was more, essentially had enough whatever to get over Hillary Clinton. What he asked you was, why didn't you support Sanders when you guys were ideologically bent in a similar way? Nobody asked you about, yes, it's clear that you supported Hillary Clinton after the fact. What he is getting at is that you took a political stance. You made a political decision, not an ideological decision. You made a decision not based on integrity, but based on your political acumen. You assumed that Sanders was going to lose this race. That was a poor assumption. You also assumed, and maybe it's not a poor assumption, ultimately you might have knew in the background, Hillary Clinton might have sent you a dirty letter, whatever, I don't know. Or you might have just had the political acumen to say, okay, Sanders is probably going to lose this race. You assumed that Hillary Clinton was going to be in the presidency. You assumed wrong. You assumed wrong. She lost. She lost to a reality show host. She lost miserably and embarrassingly to a reality show host. She was so embarrassed, she broke through the tradition of coming out and giving a speech at the end. And this was me being slightly sexist here, because I saw that and I didn't think anything of it at the time. Honestly, I didn't. I thought, oh, that has to hurt. That burns. That had to burn. Okay, yeah, I understand why she's not coming out. But every other person who lost had to come out and give their concession speech. Why didn't Hillary Clinton come out and give her a concession speech? And is it just because she has a vagina that people were like giving her a pass on it? I'm asking this question because that's somewhat of an internal bias on my part that I didn't even recognize. At the end of that night, I thought, oh man, that burned. I can understand why she didn't do that. But George Bush, Mitt Romney full well thought he was going to win that election, and so much thought he was going to win that election, he didn't even write a concession speech. He still dragged his ass out there, embarrassing and all, and gave the speech. Hillary Clinton is supposed to be a 40-year politician. I don't understand why she didn't do the same. And that's somewhat of an aside, my own internal biases. I'm just kind of making this point that he didn't ask you that question. And the question he asked you was pertinent and is the question on everybody's mind. Why? And look, I think she's a political choice, personally. I think she said, Bernie's not going to win. Hillary's going to win. Hillary's going to win the presidency. If I side with Bernie, she is going to scald me alive. She's going to burn me alive. So no, I can't support Sanders. That's what I guarantee. I can't guarantee it, but I strongly suspect that that's what it was. If you were playing chess and you were looking at what took place, and you looked at what gives me the most influence in this particular position, do you have more influence if Hillary gets elected and you can try to influence her? Or do you get more influence if you choose to side with Sanders and he loses and she essentially sends you to the furthest corners of the Democratic Party? if she thought that Sanders was going to lose, and she thought that there was no way Sanders could win because the deck was stacked against him, then yeah, she made a choice that was based on politics and not integrity. And ultimately, the progressives who are looking at her saying, who have some feelings about that, are right to have some feelings about that. They're not wrong for having some feelings about that. Your candidate lost to reality shows. And the person who you had that could have beat that candidate, you didn't support. You should have answered that question honestly. And God damn it, if that was me, we would have been there for an hour with me asking the same question over again, until you left. Because I would have gotten an answer for that question. Uygur just let her slide on it. Good job, Uygur.
No doubt about it.
Do you get why some progressives are still mad about that? That Massachusetts was decided by 1.3 points, Iowa was decided by 0.3. That perhaps he could have helped him put him over the top, and then he would have won Iowa, New Hampshire, Massachusetts.
And there are people who see it the other way.
Yeah.
You know, for me, I think about it this way.
What are you talking about? Who sees it the other way? Who sees it the other way? What does that even mean? And there's some people who see it the other way. Cenk Uygur says, you can understand why people are mad at that. I mean, he only lost by like point something. Like it was minor percentages. You could have seen it. He could have put you over the top. Well, some people see it the other way. What's the other way? I don't have no clue what that means. That Clinton would have won by more? I don't know what you're talking about. That makes no sense to me. The question that Uygur should have asked next was it a political decision for you not to support Sanders? Stop dicking around. You got her in front of you. Ask her the question. Are you there to play tiddlywinks? Are you there to get answers? Ask her the questions. You're not there to be her buddy. You're not there to be her friend. I get it. She's laughable. I get it. You like her. It has nothing to do with it. You had a candidate that you full-throatedly supported. This particular candidate was running to be president of the United States. It's a candidate who you believed in. You believed in him so much you called this place rebel headquarters because you were supporting him in spite of all the angst and anger that was tilted against him from the media. This was TYT, rebel headquarters. This was the thing that got me watching TYT again, if I'm being honest. I mean, at the point where the election ended, I stopped watching, but I started back watching TYT during the Sanders thing. Rebel headquarters. I was there, or at least I was watching during the New York primary, where Sanders lost miserably, and the end results, or the polls, exit polls, in no way matched the actual election itself. They threw 100,000 people off the roads in New York, in his hometown. This is amazing. Like, I guess what I'm getting at is letting her off the hook should not be what takes place here. And the follow-up question to her dodge on that last question should have been to just make it blunt and plain. Was it a political decision for you not to support Bernie Sanders as opposed to Hillary Clinton because you thought that Hillary Clinton was going to win the election and you thought she was going to essentially have some kind of anger or angst towards you because of it? That's the follow-up. I don't know what this is. That's the follow-up. Let's keep going. No, I'm not happy with this interview. I think this interview is horrible. He's playing tiddlywinks. This is not about tiddlywinks. There's a monster in that office. But whatever I say about Trump being in that office, he's going to do monstrous things to this country. And part of the reason he's going to be able to do monstrous things for this country is for what took place in that primaries. Now, if he's going to have this conversation with her where they're gently playing with each other, yeah, that's a problematic conversation. I would rather you ask her the actual questions that need to be asked. Did you make a political choice to not support Bernie Sanders? That's the question. That's the only question. That is the follow-up question to the dodge that she just put on. Let's keep going.
There is nothing the Republicans would love better than for us to stand around and shoot at each other over and relitigate what happened in 2016. I look at what's happening in Washington right now. I look at what Donald Trump wants to do on healthcare and the Republican majority in Congress wants to do. I look at this new budget they've put out. I look at what's happening right now in the connections with Russia. And I say, God, and we got to focus on what Donald Trump is going to do in the next 24 hours, the next week, the next month. That's our energy.
What does this have to do with the price of tea in China? What does this have to do with the price of tea in China? That's a different question. You're answering a different question. We're asking you about you and your response with Sanders. Talking about the shooting thing. No, we can have both conversations. Right now, we're having this one. We're talking about you and Democrats. And fact is, you want to obfuscate what took place in the primaries, which really tilts my perspective of you poorly. I got to be honest. It mentally tilts my perspective of you poorly. No, I have mad feelings, horrible feelings about what took place in the primaries. I have horrible feelings towards Democrats in general. You are a Democrat. You're functioning as a Democrat. And you're sitting here trying to obfuscate what took place in the primaries, going with this tired line of, we shouldn't look back. I know we cheated Sanders, but we shouldn't look back at the primaries. I don't think we should shoot each other. We're not together. We're not together. You lost 15 million people. When are you going to come to grips with that? 15 million people. That's a lot of people. That's a lot of people. Tell me, Elizabeth Warren, do you think those people left willy-nilly? Why do you think those 15 million people left? We can talk about Donald Trump. Right now, we're talking about you, Democrats, and what took place in the primaries. I'm greatly unhappy with this obfuscation. I'm greatly unhappy with this shitty interview that Cenk Uygur is doing in this particular case. He should pin her ass to the wall on these questions. He's not. He's not. This will be the thing that TYT will be looking at, analyzing, and be trashing the reporters on for doing a really shitty job in the interview. This is a horrible interview. Absolutely horrible interview.
I also understand that, but primaries are important, as you say. You really enjoy the fact that there was a strong primary and a discussion about this. Yeah. I'm going to skip the standard question about if you're going to run. You've got a book out, et cetera, right? We understand what people think that means. Yeah. Okay. But if you don't run.
You do know this is my 11th book.
I know that.
And books are how I argue.
No, I understand that.
Okay, good.
I'm skipping that question. Okay.
Okay.
What I'm asking is, if you don't run, do you think this time?
Whoa. We were talking about something important there. How do we get to her book? We were talking about the primaries. How do we just jump full well from the primaries to, hey, you know that book tends to mean that you're going to run for president? She didn't answer any of your questions, dude. She ducked two probably most important questions in this interview. And not only did you push back, or that you didn't push back, not only did you try to pin her to the wall on anything she said, gave her a pass. That's sad. That's actually really sad. Because if she's going to be this kind of, if you want to know her mettle, meaning if you want to be able to support her, what you don't realize is you need to ask those questions. Like, those are the questions that allow to get you past that point of her being a Democrat to get the support of progressives. Unless you ask those questions, unless she can answer those questions, her support base is gutted. Like whether you realize it or not. I know Elizabeth Warren is in this quagmire state, this platypus state where people don't necessarily know how to judge her. But part of the problem is those type of questions. She needs to answer those questions. She needs to answer those questions honestly. Otherwise, you're always going to have problems. It's like, can you support Elizabeth Warren for president? Maybe. How are your feelings towards her from the primary? If those feelings are negative, oh man, that's a headwind. I would argue that she needs to answer those questions in an honest way and not obfuscate or duck or dodge or anything else. If it's a political choice, say yes. I thought Hillary Clinton was going to win, and yes, I made a choice for it. I regret that decision. That's an honest decision. Yes, people are going to be mad at her for it, but people are already mad at her for it because they already believe that's what took place. This interview is horrible. This interview is fucking horrible. Somebody told me, say, hey, you need to watch this interview between Cenk Uygur and Elizabeth Warren. Okay, well, I'll take a look. The first time I looked through the interview, I just kind of glanced it. I didn't necessarily look through like in detail. It was kind of just okay, I'll get some themes, what they're talking about. Looking at it now and analyzing it from the standpoint of commentary, this is aggravating shit out of me. I just imagine if I was sitting there, the questions I would have asked would have been different than his. And he has this amazing platform where he's getting these people on, where he can ask these questions. And this is the question that he asks. He's become essentially Chuck Todd in this case, Mr. Oblivious. There are questions that need to be asked Chuck. Is Chuck going to ask him? Of course not. Of course not. I would hope that this is not what he's going to become. I honestly hope this is not what TYT is going to become. He should have pinned her ass to the wall. If you're going to call yourself a progressive network, then the questions progressive would have asked should have been at the tip of your tongue the moment that she. All I'm saying is these questions should have been different. The follow-up should have been different. The tenor of this interview should have been different. Her dodging those questions should have been met with follow-up questions, trying to still get back at the point that she's trying to dodge. To not let her dodge those questions, or at the very least pin her down in a way that makes it very clear that she doesn't want to answer that question, which in and of itself is an answer. I just wish this interview was different. I want to support Elizabeth Warren, which is what aggravating me about this interview, because there's nothing that I heard in this interview that tells me anything that I want to know. Meaning the hard questions that I think need to be asked, the hard questions that he kind of asked, but backed away from when she just completely dodged, ducked, and pretended the question didn't exist. Those are questions I actually want to know. This other stuff I don't care about. Why do you support Sanders? I don't care if she's running for president. Why do you support Sanders in the primary? Why? 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 I want to know. That question interests me. Was it a political thing? Or was it some other reason? I would like to know. Cenk Uygur is not going to push on that point. Just keep going. It's almost over.
More forceful opinion in the primaries, because that is when people will decide who are standard bearers. Their standard bearer is the reality show star.
Yeah.
And our standard bearer will either be a progressive or someone who is more beholden to donors, or someone in between. So if, for example, Bernie Sanders were to run again, if you're not running, would you support him?
You know, I don't know where we'll be in 2020. It's a long time off.
No, it's not.
I supported and helped Bernie long before I ever thought I'd be in politics. I used to go out, went up to do town halls with Bernie.
That's not what he asked. That's not what he asked. Why can't you just answer a goddamn question? He's asking you straightforward. I don't like people lying to me in these interviews. I don't like people lying to me in these interviews. And yes, I'm getting annoyed. And yes, I'm kind of screaming. But I don't like people lying to me in interviews. I ask you a question. You call yourself a progressive, and you're telling me you can't answer any of the questions that I ask you. Are you going to support Bernie Sanders if he runs for president again? I don't. I mean, I used to support Sanders. I didn't ask you what you used to do. I used to have a pacifier. I used to be 2 feet tall. I used to be a lot of things. Are you going to support Sanders if he runs again? And if not, what would be the reason that you don't? That's the question. What's so wrong about that question? Why are these questions oblivious to Cenk Uygur? I don't get this interview. This interview makes no sense to me. She's dodging everything that's being asked of her. This woman calls herself the second most progressive senator in the country, and she can't answer just direct questions that relates to progressive politics. Progressive my ass. If you can't answer basic questions, this looks like Tom Perez asking questions when Chris Hayes is asking questions. Where he can't answer the questions. You ask Bernie Sanders the question, Bernie Sanders answers whatever you ask him. Doesn't matter. Ask him anything. He'll tell you. Why can't Elizabeth Warren, second most progressive person in the country apparently, based on their whatever metric they're coming up with, why is she dodging all these questions? Why is she dodging all these questions? What's so uncomfortable about the questions being asked of her? She doesn't want to be chained to this idea of supporting Sanders in the same way she didn't want to support Sanders before. Telling me you supported Sanders in town halls when you didn't have any skin in the game doesn't tell me anything. That doesn't tell me anything. In this particular case, you were asked the question of whether or not you would support Bernie Sanders. The question is, would you? And if not, seems to be the most pertinent question in the world. That's not the question that Cenk Uygur is going to ask, though. Let's keep going.
about what was happening to working families. I used to call in on Bernie's when he had a radio show for a period of time. But I don't know where we'll be in 2020. I don't think Bernie knows where we'll be in 2020. So I don't know what Bernie's going to do, and I don't want to be in a position to push Bernie to do anything. What I see right now really is that as Democrats, as progressives, we can't make politics a once every 4-year thing. It has got to be an everyday thing. Donald Trump has not been in office, 150 days yet? It's less than that. He's got a long time to go.
Here's a question. Why do you believe Donald Trump is in that office? Why do you believe Donald Trump is in that office? Isn't that a straightforward question? Isn't that an honest question? Like, I'm not asking any gotchas. I'm asking just basic, straightforward questions. Why do you believe Elizabeth Warren, Senator Elizabeth Warren, why do you believe Donald Trump is in that office? Do you believe it had anything to do with the weakness and effectlessness of the Democratic Party not being able to accomplish anything when they were in that office? Does it have anything to do with Obama giving 95% of the wealth to the top 1%? Does it have anything to do with talking about hope and change, not doing a goddamn thing to change anything? Why do you believe Donald Trump is in that office? Does it have something to do with him being cheated, Sanders, in the primary? Explain to me. Explain to your audience. Explain to my progressive audience of 4 million people. Why do you, Elizabeth Warren, believe Donald Trump was able to ascend to the presidency? Again, that seems like a natural question.
Was the Republicans do, Republican majority in the House, Republican majority in the Senate. The way I see it is, man, we got to be all in on the fights that are occurring right now, the things they're doing right now. I worry because it's healthcare, because it's this budget. I worry about what's happening over at the Environmental Protection Agency. I worry about what's happening at the Department of Education, and how we need to exercise oversight. And I want to use oversight not just in a technical Washington sense, but in a democratic, small d democratic sense, that we watch, that we ask our government, we demand that our government be responsive to us. But that means being focused on the fights that are in front of us right now. We cannot sit back and just start the speculation on what's going to happen 3.5 years from now.
So then before we go, tell me in 2018, what are the issues that the Democrats should focus on? What do you think are not only important, but winning political issues?
So, look, the Russia thing, we're going to have to see how this one resolves. But right now, the idea that there is a connection between a foreign government that we know, our intelligence agencies have told us, hacked into American systems to influence the outcome.
That's not true.
2016
That's
election.
A lie. That's a blatant lie.
That's stunning.
That's a stunning lie.
Right now, Republicans won't even talk openly about the fact that it happened, much less what it is that.
She just lied right there. I mean, they never said that they hacked into people's voting systems. I've read the report saying, at worst, they were saying they were trying to pry into the electoral systems. I've read nothing that said that Russia hacked into the electoral system at all. That's not something I've read. I don't know where Elizabeth Warren gets that from, unless she's saying classified documents. There's nothing to show that Russia hacked into and changed our election. If that's the argument she's making, I need to see that. I need to see that. I haven't seen that anywhere. A, I don't believe this Russia thing until I see a direct thing saying the evidence showing Russia did it. B, no tie has been created between Trump and Russia. I don't know what she's trying to make up. She's trying to create a tie here that nobody knows exists. And C, I honestly believe she just lied right there. I think she just lied. I'm going to look that up, but I think she just lied right there. Let's keep going.
We need to do to get to the bottom of an investigation about it and make sure it never, ever, ever happens again. I think that's going to be a really important, and where that develops, about the relationship between Russia, the Trump campaign, and Donald Trump personally. I think that's going to be a big deal. I think it's a big deal to talk about healthcare. There is nothing right now that better illustrates the difference between Republicans and Democrats, that Republicans want to knock 24 million people off health care so that they can give a tax break to a handful of millionaires and billionaires. They want to drive up costs for middle-class families and work.
But you knew that. You knew that. You knew that beforehand. You knew they were going to do that when they took office. They never lied. They told you what they were going to do. We're going to repeal Obamacare. We're going to kill Obamacare. We're going to kill the ACA. We're going to kill Obamacare. They've talked about it for the past 8 years. You knew what they were going to do. Donald Trump did not get an upsurge of votes. Hillary Clinton was sending people away from the polls. There's a difference. There's a massive difference in those things. The point I'm making to you is that the responsibility of getting elected, was Democrats. They just lost. They just lost. If you're going to lose your health care, thank the Democratic Party. They're the ones who are responsible for it. And she's acting like Trump care and Obamacare. Yes, they're going to knock 20 million people off the rolls. But Obamacare didn't cover everybody either. Obama put through a health care plan. He had Democrats in the House. He had the Senate. And that health care plan still didn't cover everybody. And Democrats pretended as if it was some kind of universal health care. It wasn't. You still have millions of people off the rolls. Everybody in this country needs to buy a car. What? What do you mean everybody in this country needs to buy a car? Everybody in this country needs to buy health insurance from a private industry. You're essentially mandating, you're trying to deal with the problem in healthcare by making everybody get healthcare by law. It would be far better for you to say, okay, by the time you're born to the time you die, Medicare for everybody. And you wouldn't have been taken to court over it. In the same way these guys are screaming at the top of their lungs about Russia, they should have been screaming at the top of their lungs about healthcare. That's all I'm saying. The problems that you're talking about right now are derived from what took place in the primaries and what took place in the presidency. You're acting as if Republicans are causing these things. Republicans are somewhat weak and feckless in and of themselves. It's not a party that can really do anything. They're a fringe party at this point. Your party is a party that really deals with legislation and deals with trying to get things done. If you didn't get things done in the past term when you had absolute power, that's not their fault. That's yours. The fact that you lost that election, again, was not their fault. It was yours. Anything that takes place that's negative, anybody who hurts, kills, maims, anybody who loses their health care, is at the feet of the Democratic Party. Yes, the Republican Party is going to do it, but yes, you knew they were going to do it. You knew they were going to do it. They told you what they were going to do. He told you he was going to destroy the EPA. You knew they didn't care about this other stuff and they just wanted tax cuts. You knew this stuff. None of those things was enough to change the way you were running your campaigns. It wasn't. Hillary Clinton believed that this man is a monster. Because this man is a monster, those people are going to put me in office anyway. Essentially, I'm going to hold this country hostage. I'm going to put a gun to their head named Donald Trump. You're either going to get shot or you're going to put me in that office. The country chose to get shot.
Working families so they can give a tax break to a handful of millionaires and billionaires. They want to say it's okay to charge more for people with pre-existing conditions or cut out people with mental health issues or substance abuse. Also, they can give a tax break to a handful of millionaires and billionaires. Man, how could you have a better distinction between what it means to be a Republican in America today and what it means to be a Democrat? And then look at that budget. Look at that nasty budget that Donald Trump has sent forward. And the Republicans are saying, hey, yeah, it looks like it's right in about the right place. A budget that takes areas like public education and says, hey, let's cut funding for, for foreign languages, for PE, cut funding for AP classes, cut funding for the Special Olympics. I mean, are you kidding me?
They're Republicans.
And then for college students, to say let's get rid of loan forgiveness for young people who go into public service, for people who are really moved by public service. Let's just drown them on the student loans. Let's just pack them on, and they want to drive up the costs on student loans for low incomes.
Certainly, she knew that that's what they were going to do. Certainly, she knew. Like, this can be one of those situations where Elizabeth Warren was completely in the dark. She's like, oh my God, I can't believe what Republicans are doing to the budget. You knew what they were going to do. You hyped him up to be the goddamn worst thing that could ever happen to anything. Certainly, part of that worst thing that could happen to anything was a nasty budget, as you call it. Come on, man. You helped him get into that office. I don't want to hear you complaining. You helped him get into that office. That's what it boils down to. Your team, your squad, in no way did your team run any particular difference in their particular campaign. You full well believed that the American public was going to put your candidate in office purely because the other guy was a goddamn goblin. And you were wrong. You were wrong. The person who you could have supported, who would have been able to be a bulwark against that, you didn't support him. You didn't support him. You didn't support him for political reasons. Be honest. Cenk Uygur is not going to hold you to it. I will. Be honest. You didn't support him for political reasons, and your candidate lost. Your political acumen was garbage. That's what it boils down to. Your political acumen stunk. You thought she was going to get into that office because you full well believed that the American public was so terrified that they had to vote for her. They didn't have a choice to vote for her. There's a gun to their head named Donald Trump, and goddamn it, the American public is not stupid enough to pull the trigger. They pulled the trigger. They pulled the trigger. Donald Trump is your president. The reality show host, as you call him, is your president. And the steps that got him there was from your team. It's from your team. And at each point along the way, it came out, it's my turn. It's my turn. It didn't matter what the public wanted. It didn't matter the sentiment of the public. It didn't matter that the polling showed that Hillary Clinton was either close or losing to every other Republican in that mix when Bernie Sanders wasn't. It didn't matter that they cheated in the primaries. None of those things mattered to Elizabeth Warren. Even here, she glosses over everything. Oh, well, the primaries, I thought the primaries were great. The primaries weren't great. They cheated. They're in lawsuit right now over what took place in the primaries. And you're sitting here talking about the primaries were great. And Cenk Uygur is sitting here also saying nothing about it. Yes, this is aggravating to me. This is immensely aggravating to me. He's having an interview with Elizabeth Warren, who's supposed to be, quote unquote, the second progressive. And she's glossing over what took place in the primaries, talking about, I thought what took place in the primaries were great. You thought them cheating Bernie Sanders was great? You thought that was great? Do you understand that part of the reason why she lost was because of that cheating? Do you get that? Do you get that? You're bitching about this budget and everything else. Part of the reason that he's in this office right now doing that things with that quote unquote nasty budget. Part of the reason why you guys lost everything between state, federal, local elections is because of the things that took place in the primaries. You guys were a repellent. 15 million people left your party. Put that in context. 15 million people said, I don't want shit to do with the Democratic Party. That is an amazing number. Why do you think those people left? And shouldn't Cenk Uygur ask the question, why do you think so many people left your party? And do you think the fact that those people, or whatever the impetus was for those people leaving your party, has something to do with what took place in the primaries? And if you're saying that the primaries were awesome and the primaries were great, how does that level up with those people leaving the party? Those questions aren't going to be asked. We don't want to ask those questions. Those questions offend Elizabeth Warren's sensibilities, but those are the questions that need to be asked. Those are the difficult, uncomfortable questions. But I'm not there to play tiddlywinks, and I'm not there to be your goddamn buddy. I'm there to get information. If you want to call yourself a quote-unquote progressive, and by the way, why didn't you support Standing Rock? Why didn't you support Standing Rock? You call yourself a Native American, or at least part Native American. Look, as coming from another part Native American, my grandfather was Cherokee. I don't understand why, even if you weren't, even if you were just a progressive, they were over there battering those people, injuring those people. They were literally using the boot of the law to bash those people's heads in. They had corporations that have dogs to bite, water protectors. They just wanted to protect their water from some kind of corporate interest. Now, under normal circumstances, you're talking about leaving blood and teeth on the floor. You didn't even give them a call. You didn't even get in the goddamn ring. You waited until the easement was sent before you said anything about it. You put out some tepid message about Standing Rock. Goddamn sham. Yes, you're great on the banking stuff. Everything else, you're bust. You're a political actor just like all these other political actors. And the fact that you're sitting here not being able to answer a question, not being able to give an honest take, and literally giving one political Democrat answer after the next, it's humiliating. Cenk Uygur not holding your feet to the fire. It's humiliating to the TYT network. It's humiliating. It's humiliating. And you can tell him I said it. There's no reason to have this particular interview and have this woman skating around in this particular way. It's a 30-minute interview, and you're telling me in 30 minutes you can pin her ass to the ground on one or two of the main issues that progressives care about? Let's keep going. It's almost over. This is aggravating me. This is immensely aggravating me. I don't want her bitching about something when you can foresee it is going to take place. If I'm playing chess and I know that if I make a particular move that I'm going to have hell to pay for that particular move, then who's responsible? Me, knowing full well that that move was going to take place, or the person who made the second contrary move. I know what he's going to do because he's compelled to do it. Yes, you can be mad that that person did it. So yes, you can be mad that Republicans are doing these things, but ultimately, Democrats knew full well what was going to take place if they did what they were going to do, and how they were going to get elected was straightforward. Bernie Sanders gave you the roadmap. He gave you the roadmap to get elected. You said fuck Sanders, and you cheated the man all the way, and you assumed that progressives were still going to vote for you after cheating him. You were wrong. You lost to a reality show host. Now you have no power in Washington. And in having no power in Washington, now you're bitching about the Republicans not bringing your stupid ass bills up. Bills that you would have never put up in the first place if you were the Democrats, if you guys had power. I don't want to hear this shit about, it's like, the Republicans aren't putting up any rap bills. They're not supporting anything that we're doing. I don't understand. We're trying to get free health care and they're not supporting me. No, they're not supporting you. They're Republicans. They're not in your party. They're not in your party. If you wanted to have those things up, you had the opportunity to do it when you were in power. You didn't take that opportunity. You passed a right-wing healthcare bill, a bill that's falling apart, that doesn't cover everybody. And now you're bitching that Republicans are going to axe that bill further, still leaving some of the edifice of Obamacare in place. But certainly a weakened and worse bill of a bill that was already weak and not all that great. Let's keep going.
Students that want to cut Pell Grants. And that's just one area where it's all about shrinking opportunity. And then they want to cut the budget for the Environmental Protection Agency. This will lop off a huge part of the EPA. Let those guys dump in the rivers, let them trail offshore. Boy, to me, those are the areas Democrats should talk about. The areas where the differences between what it means to be a Democrat and what it means to be a Republican could not be clearer. Those are the fights we need to have, and boy, we need to have them all the way.
All right, one last thing, because nobody ever asks you about foreign policy, I feel like, and I don't want to make the same mistake. So there's a million things to ask about, and as Trump would say, nobody knew it was this complicated. Right? So I'll just ask you about one, because Syria, it's so hard to tell what the right position there should be, and I've become more non-interventionist as I've gone on. Partly because I've seen the results, but I'm curious as to what your take is. So fighting ISIS is easy to say that, and to perhaps to executing it and winning it not easy. But do we fight Assad, or do we continue to bomb in the area? Do we withdraw? What's your take on what to do there?
Notice everything you're asking me is about the military strategy, but ultimately a solution in Syria is going to be a political solution. So we have to think about those two things together. How is it that we're going to negotiate to a place of stability in Syria, something that doesn't either provide a home for ISIS, doesn't further destabilize the region and threaten our allies in the area, and that isn't a humanitarian crisis that just continues to unfold? And it's the reminder, it's not just going to be the United States and Syria. It's not just going to be the United States and Syria and Russia. It's going to take bringing a lot of parties together and talking about what kind of a Syria goes forward. And a big part of that is going to be what we can negotiate with the Russians. Let's face it, Assad would not be in charge if it weren't for the Russians. He already would have fallen. It's been Russian support that has kept him propped up.
Is Cenk Uygur going to say, well, hey, you understand that for the most part, we were sending in forces to undermine that particular government. Do you believe we should stop sending forces, terrorists, to undermine the Syrian government? Seems like a natural question. That seems like a natural question in the world. Also, she's making this thing like Assad being in there is a bad case. She understands that if Assad had fallen, ISIS was taking the country, right? I mean, she's saying that like Russia propped him up with some bad thing. Who do you think was going to take over that country if Assad falls? Tell me, Elizabeth Warren. Explain to me, Senator Warren. Tell me your political acumen that hasn't been on point in regards to local politics or presidential politics. Explain to me. Who do you believe, if Assad fell, who do you believe was going to take that position? And do you believe that Russia wants essentially a terrorist government on its border? Russia has a vested interest in propping up Syria for the same reason we'd have a vested interest in propping up some other government if there was some kind of terrorist organization trying to destroy that government on our border or near our country. What do you think is the best option? Assad or the terrorists in that particular country? You tell me. You tell me. Let's hear her answer to be fair. Let's finish her answer.
So when that's the case, you can't pretend that somehow just one more bomb dropped on Assad is somehow going to resolve this. It's not going to be resolved in that sense. It's got to be negotiated, and we've got to have the big players in the room, and that means you've got to have Russia.
If at the end of the day Assad survives then and is still the leader of Syria, can you live with that?
Yeah. It's like a lot of things. In a world of bad choices, it depends on what the alternatives are. Because the key for me,
I am liking this woman less and less. I honestly am. It's the non-answers. I don't like non-answers. Stop obfuscating. The answer to that question is yes. I can live with it. The Syrian government, the people in Syria are responsible for the Syrian government in the same way that we ourselves are responsible for the American government. If they get to themselves to topple that particular government, then they topple that government. It's none of our business. Yes, we can live with Assad in that office because for the most part, it stabilizes that region. Ultimately, if Assad falls, hell would break loose. All hell would break loose. I can live with Assad. The only answer to that question is yes, I can live with Assad. Now, if she's talking about some kind of regime change, that's none of her business. She needs to stay out of that system and tell. I'm beginning to like this woman less and less. That's all I'm saying. That's all I'm saying. The only answer, I'm sorry, I'm getting tired. It's 4 o'clock in the morning. The only answer to that question is yes, I can live with Assad. I can live with Assad. What takes place in Syria belongs to the Syrian people, not the United States, not a bunch of foreign powers making a decision on what takes place. Their government is their government. It's their responsibility. The United States should in no way be assisting in trying to undermine that particular government. This conversation, to some degree, is somewhat lacking context because I would have hoped that Cenk Uygur would have brought that fact up into this conversation. Either bring up Tulsi Gabbard saying, hey, Tulsi Gabbard says that we're supporting terrorists in that particular region. And she put a bill out saying we should stop supporting terrorists. Are you a co-signer on that bill? Those seem like just natural questions to me. It just seems like a horrible interview. It's 30 minutes of fluff. That's what it is. 30 minutes of fluff. He's been a fluffer for Elizabeth Warren. And yes, in the sexual term, yes, he's been a fluffer for Elizabeth Warren. Yeah, it's horrid. It's a horrible interview. Let's finish her off. Come on.
They cannot be a place where ISIS can retreat to. They cannot be a destabilizing force that threaten our allies. And we cannot have this humanitarian crisis that just continues to unfold. And he has proven that he is willing, that he is a monster, that he is willing to gas his own people. But those have to be our goals. And we have to be hard-nosed about keeping our eye on what the goals are, and if we can meet the goals, then we go with that.
Senator Elizabeth Warren, the book is This Fight is Our Fight, The Battle to Save America's Middle Class. We'll have a link to it where.
It sounds like, if I'm not mistaken, at the end she says, if it meets our goals, we'll go with them. That's what it sounded like she said at the end. Well, for the people who stayed here for this experience, God bless. It's 4 in the morning here. I think it's 3 in the morning in Eastern time zone. I think it's what time is it? 4, 3, 2 in the morning, California time zone. Yeah, I don't have much to say about this. I have to be honest. I hated this interview. I hated this interview. I watched this interview, just like I said, real quick for the first time, just to get a flavor for it. And just sitting here thinking about what they were saying as they were saying it. Cenk Uygur is usually not this bad of an interviewer. And I suspect it has to do with him kind of just liking Elizabeth Warren. So he's not necessarily asking her pointed, difficult questions that she needs to ask. Or at the very least, he would ask her the question and just move on to the next question, like he was reading it off a teleprompter. Like, all right, I asked that one, check. But she didn't give you an answer. She didn't give you an answer. You just moved to the next question. She didn't give you an answer. And as somebody who, if I'm not mistaken, used to be a lawyer, I know goddamn well Cenk Uygur knows when he's not getting an answer. This is aggravating to me. I'm sitting here and then she asks a question. My first thought is the very next question automatically tells itself. And it's the question they completely avoids and moves on. It's just aggravating. Why can't she answer a question? Why can't she answer those questions? There were like 3 or 4 questions that was pointed and directly to her that she obfuscated, danced around, and then one. I thought the primaries were great. Did you now? Did you now? Did you think that the primaries were great? What was so great about the primaries to you? That seems to be the very next question. Oh, well, I think they had a great, these differences in opinions and everything else. But you would agree that ideologically you were more bent towards Sanders. Yes, you would agree that you're the second most progressive person in the country. Why do I have to be the second most? I mean, how do I be the first? Well, that's okay, fair enough. Whatever the metric is. But somebody who you're ideologically similar to, you didn't support. I thought the primaries were awesome. That's not really what I asked you, Elizabeth. Why didn't you support Sanders in the primaries? Did it have something to do with political reason? Meaning you thought Clinton was going to win. And because you thought Clinton was going to win, you didn't think Sanders had a chance. And you didn't want to get on Clinton's bad side. That's the question. That's the follow-up. Not dancing around. Follow-up. That's the pointed follow-up that you need to ask, because that's what he gets. That's the crux of what progressives are saying. Oh man, you have Elizabeth Warren on your show, and this is the interview that you have with Elizabeth Warren. This was ghastly. This was ghastly. And yes, I understand that when you're in front of somebody, it becomes a little bit difficult to ask those questions. It doesn't matter. You decided to take that position. You decided to be sitting right there. You decided to take a job, in which case you were going to be sitting in front of Elizabeth Warren. You had the opportunity to sit in front of Elizabeth Warren, and the questions that you needed to ask her, you didn't ask her. You failed at asking her the proper questions. She danced around the questions that you did ask her, meaning the information that you should have gotten out of this interview was non-existent. This interview was horrid. This interview was absolutely horrid. I'm going to end it here, and I'm going to get 2 or 3 hours of sleep before the People Summit. All right, guys, if you enjoyed the content, feel free to share, like, subscribe. You can always support the work through Patreon or PayPal. You know the routine. Thanks, guys.